In this video, we'll discuss how Iggy Pop carries something called the death mask and how it relates to his life terrain. Enjoy. Welcome back, everyone. If you are new to my face reading channel, please go up here and watch the 5-minute crash course face reading video. It's not long, like I said, only 5 minutes, but if you're new to the channel, that'll give a really good breakdown of what face reading is, what it isn't. We'll give you some terms and terminology. If you're liking my content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. Please continue to share my videos, send them to people. That's how my channel grows. So, filming in my backyard today. My office is a mess. My daughter had a birthday party here last night. You can probably see big 12-foot screen in the back. There's still some grill stuff on the lawn. She watched Lord of the Rings, the 1978 Lord of the Rings, had a jumpy house back here, water slide, burgers, smoked ribs. Pretty sure some core memories were made. A bunch of our friends going completely apeshit here. So, good times. But in any case, my house is a little bit in shambles, so I'm outside for today. Our face reading today is Iggy Pop. So, I'm not completely familiar with Iggy Pop in terms of what he's done, the songs he's written and whatnot, but he is a very famous musician. So he's not one of the people I follow. He's not someone that ever really spoke to me in terms of music, but very prolific, was buddies with David Bowie and was definitely a huge in the music scene. And when I looked at his face, the reason I wanted to read him was specifically the core theme that I wanted to focus on was the death mask. The death mask is it's a look on the face. It's a countenance on the face that can come from a few different angles. It can come from a few different areas in life. So one is sometimes people are just born with the death mask. The thing you have to remember about that term, the death mask, is not that the death mask is explicitly meaning you're dying. That's not what it means, or it's not even necessarily bad. What it means is that the person's personality bumps elbow to elbow, or that thin veil between life and death. They sit on that edge a little bit more in terms of experience, in terms of how they operate, in terms of things they pursue. So the way this look, the way you see it on the face, the way it's characterized is by a skeletal look. It looks like the cheeks typically hollow. You'll see that the cheekbones, the cheek in particular, will be hollow. The face will look a bit more skeletal, and it's an interesting look. And when you see it, the person looks like they are a little bit aligned with death. The face simply looks skeletal. So, that being said, Iggy Pop carries this. Now, the thing we have to think about with the death mask is when a person carries this, again, that veil between life and death is going to be, that razor's edge that they're walking is pretty thin. And oftentimes they have a strong death instinct. You can see this face on martial artists sometimes. If you look at UFC fighters, sometimes you can see these really chiseled faces. And people that have a strong death instinct, the samurai culture is a prime example. People that were willing to interface with death, be, as the samurai or the Bushido and the Japanese culture would say, death sits on your shoulder at all times. So this idea that death is always sitting there waiting to take you, and people who can confront that with a bit more ease than the average person also, they say, have a strong death instinct. This instinct can also be piggybacked onto this face. Now, in Iggy Pop's case, I think of where a lot of the death mask came from is from drug use. So this I do know about him, that he was a very, very, very heavy drug user for many years. I don't know if he's in recovery, if he still does drugs, I have no idea. But he did burn a lot of Jing through his life, through drug use. If you look at this younger picture of him, he's young, okay, and there is no death mask. His face is not hollowed out. And I also want you to take note of his mouth, because as we look at an older picture in a minute of him, you're going to see the difference between how his mouth and how the features on the face change depending on what we do with our life force. So in this picture, looks pretty young, pretty supple for the most part. Looks like a lean guy. He's pretty sinewy. That's a lot of wood energy. But fast forward to this picture, a much older man, a much more hollowed out look. And there's something vacuous and hollow in his Shen, the Shen being the spirit or the consciousness. There's something, vacuous. There's something that has been sucked in, hollowed out, and there's something for me when I look at him, there's a little something that's a little cold and a little empty in there. Now, artists in general, they will play to these things. They will, make weird faces. They will look overly serious. The expressive artist type is going to do that. The thing I want you to think about when we're looking at his face, though, is the evolution of a face. What are the choices that Iggy Pop made in terms of lifestyle and, habits that brought him to a place where his face looks like this? Now, we all age. And yes, leaner people are going to be more defined and whatnot. We do lose yin as we age as well. The face starts to hollow out simply because we are losing yin. There's a really demoralizing stat in Chinese medicine, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit here. This is not a direct quote, but when you read the classics, the Huangdi Jing, which is this book that talks about, all of these longevity principles essentially, and there's a lot of different treatises and things that are written in this context. And one of the things they stress is they're like, by the time you're 40, your yin is surely half. I hate when I hear those absolute statements, like at 40, because I'm 42, they're like, half of your yin is gone. I don't think that's necessarily true. But what they're pointing to, though, is at age 40, you burned up through a lot of your yin, and the yin is your kerosene. That's the fluid in the lantern, and when that goes out, and when that depletes, life force starts to go down because the ride's going to be over at some point, right? None of us get out alive. So the death mask for him really came from drug use, in my opinion, looking at his face. This is where we see the sunken look, the heroin chic look. Kate Moss had this look. A lot of people have lost flesh through the face. And when we see that, one of the things you want to keep in mind is that this area, the cheek, is regulated by the metal element. The metal element regulates the lung and large intestine. So when we think about this area, the lung and large intestine, more specifically, the metal element tunes and calibrates your immune response. Now, your immune response is not just about the pathogens that we fight off in the external world. It's also about how you establish boundaries. How well do you let the crummy politics of the world come in and penetrate you, and how well do you ward them off? Even bad ideas, bad relationships, bad friendships, bad work deals. That's all about what's something they call wei qi. It's this protective layer that is between the skin and your muscle, and it protects you from the outside world. And so this area, when we see this hollow out, that means wei qi, the immune response, the lung system, all of those metrics have been hollowed out and sunken in. And when I start to see this hollowing in the cheek, that's not a great marker in face reading. That's something, when you see this hollowed out, you want to pay attention and be asking the person, like, hey, what are you doing with your lifestyle? What's your immune system like? Do you find that you get sick often? Are you depleted easily? It's something you want to pay attention to, but he has gotten this and developed that over the years. So I find that interesting. And the thing you have to think about is that with really intense drug use, lots of cocaine, lots of heroin, lots of whatever, really hard, methamphetamines, that burns up your yin and your jing real fast. So if you think of the kerosene lantern, I use this analogy all the time. You have a kerosene lantern, the fluid at the bottom is the jing, the flame is the qi. That's the vital energy that we use on a day-to-day basis. And then the light that kerosene lantern shines into the room and reflects off the walls, that's the Shen. It's the immaterial part that you can't touch, but gives off a feeling, right? The ambience of light coming into a room really does create a vibe. So Jing, Qi, Shen, those drugs are going to burn up your Jing, and then on the yin-yang spectrum, yang being energy in the body, and then yin being the material of the body, it's going to burn those things up. So you really have to be cognizant for people in general. Hard drug use is going to burn those things up, and we see this reflected in his face. So I think he's kind of an interesting case study in terms of someone who has, relatively supple features in his youth, and then through his choices through his life, he's really hollowed out. And it's just something to pay attention to. So when we talk about the face in terms of health metrics, I think he's a good face to look at in terms of assessing health. What I would say is, I think he's probably stable now. He's got a really hardy constitution. That's the other thing. I want you to look at the size of this man's chin, the width right here. That's all water energy. That's willpower. He's got a really, really, really thick, wide chin, and that's all about strong kidneys. People with strong kidneys have a lot of Jing to burn. So that's interesting, but I just want you to kind of think about this in the big picture. Now, backtracking a little bit, his mouth, His mouth was very supple, and I'm not sure if I touched on that point or if I forgot to say it. When I'm doing these readings, I'm kind of like tangentially moving through my mind, so I kind of talk in stream of consciousness a little bit. But the point I wanted to make about his mouth is that very full in his youth, and as he's gotten older, the lips thinned out. And you would ask, like, why? What's the deal with that? Why would the lips get thinner in this context? The thing you have to remember is that the mouth is the earth element, okay? It's the most dominant earth element feature. And the mouth, the more supple it is, okay, the fuller the lips and all of those things, we're thinking about pleasure seeking. So Iggy Pop was a high sex drive guy. He also has that mouth in his youth too. Thinner upper lip, really full lower lip. We see this. This is a high libido marker to begin with. But sensuality, things relating to the five senses, pleasure seeking, that's all relating to the mouth. And when we see those full, shapely lips, those are things that we have to pay attention to. And the lips getting thinner over time is almost like an over-extraction of the earth element, an over-extraction of pleasure seeking, literally where things became tight-lipped. And that's what you see in his face. So this is very common with people who have been really heavy into drugs for a long time. They can have full features, and what those drugs do is they consume the earth. And you have to remember, classically, in the five-element wheel, earth sits at the center. The other four elements wheel around it. The earth is at the middle. That's the spleen and stomach energy. That's also your musculature, the four limbs, the basis of your skeletal muscle. This is why it's so important, if you think about it in classical theory, why everyone needs to strength train. I don't care what you do, especially after the age of 40. Do not sleep on strength training. That muscle building is the central cogwheel to the elemental system. As many of you may or may not know, muscle is called the organ of longevity in the current modern trends of muscle-centric medicine. So the whole point to this is, okay, a little side tangent there, but is that his mouth has been depleted. The earth element has been taken down. And if you look at his body, the four limbs, he's always been very wiry and sinewy, and he became even more so as he aged. So I think a lot of that drug use, Jing, all that stuff being burned up, the fluids hollow out, the person looks a little more emaciated. And so that's sort of where I see Iggy Pop. Now, if Iggy Pop were a lifestyle client, and I was working with him, the thing I would be telling him to do is really nourishing earth. Okay, I would be looking at his more original face in his youth and saying, you had a really full earth mouth. You also have big expressive eyes. Big eyes often relate to artistry and expression. So my eyes run kind of big too. I'm an artist. I definitely like to express myself. I'm on camera. I can talk. So all these things outside of that, okay, the thing that I would want to come back to, given that hollowing, is I would want yin coming back into the picture, soft, supple earth coming back in. So I would be putting him on like a pretty sizable strength training regimen. I would also put him on like a high-fat, high-carb diet. And I rarely would suggest those things to people. But if you mix high-fat and high-carb, that is the fastest way to gain weight. Okay, so you can have lots of fat and vegetables, and low carb things. The body does pretty well with that. You can have high protein and high fat and vegetables, and that's going to be fine. But mixing fat and carbs at the same time is usually very problematic for most people. But with a constitution like his, with this earth depletion, I would be suggesting he cook those kinds of things for a while until I saw probably 10 or 20 pounds put onto him where things fleshed out a little bit. So, that would be the direction there. And then I would be probing into him a little bit about his lifestyle. Given these features and what I'm seeing, I would be asking questions around, what's stillness look like? That intensity, that gaze, that vacuous gaze. There's a taking energy that comes with the death mask sometimes, a sucking of energy. And so I would be dialoguing, in my lifestyle guidance with him about that and saying, hey, so if this has been your tendency to consume a lot of sex, a lot of drugs, a lot of these things, the way you counterbalance that is by giving and externally pushing things out into the world and reversing that energy. As opposed to sucking in, it's kind of like pushing out. So these are the themes I would be working with him around his life force management. So that's all I've got for today for Iggy Pop. Thanks for your time.